Oh, pig demon. Oh, you're right, Ludo? What, you've been playing Majora's Mask, I see. Well, yeah, it's a bit weird, eh? But it's such a great example of taking a massive swing under time constraints, but instead of completely fumbling and missing with Final Fantasy VIII, Nintendo actually popularized a now obscenely influential subgenre so well that no one has even come close to replicating it even decades later. So, with all of this, what really makes Majora's Mask tick? No, it's not just the giant clock. Well, actually, kind of. It's more of the impending bell end above it. The pressure this moon begets, coupled with the developer's invisible management of its players over the course of 3 recursive in-game days, and time management is a huge aspect of that. We spoke about time management in my episode on time and the narrative device of the ticking clock, how this is an effective method of propelling our heroes forward, but it's difficult to translate this into the video game medium because of the player's ability to pause, meander and tackle low-stakes side quests. The idea of urgency can lead to a lot of Ludo narrative dissonance. On the opposite side of the problem, having a ticking clock device loom too much can add excessive pressure, and instead of encouraging the player to push through it, it can instead make them want to put it down. This is why most games don't have time conditions or failure states if the player decides to tackle something other than the main quest itself. But interestingly enough, Majora has all of this. A ticking clock with a hard cut-off time limit, time-gated failure states, and not just for individual challenges but for the main story progression as well, while also juggling 25 plus NPC schedules that all influence each other, something that was so complicated that they needed to utilize a RAM expansion pack for the N64 just to make it all work, with all of this condensed into 3 in-game days that if you fail to do its tasks in time, you'll reset and have to do everything all over again. Now, if you just describe this to me in the modern day, devoid of the Zelda IP or Nintendo's pedigree, I'd say it would be shit, but it isn't. So how did Majora's Mask manage to have this level of complexity tied to a foreboding time constraint without making the player feel overwhelmed? Well, step 1 is manufacturing this panic and then giving players the tools to circumvent it. During the player's first 3 days trapped as a Deku Scrub, time passes faster, or about 1.5 times speed, compared to the rest of the game after the player receives the Ocarina. There are 25 seconds per hour, 10 minutes 48 seconds per day, giving them around 32 minutes 24 seconds total to complete their tasks. After this first cycle, this time is increased to 54 minutes, and it's even before the player has played the inverted Song of Time to further slow this down, which the player has an incredibly high likelihood of encountering as it's on the direct path of progression. Well, unless you're allergic to creepy looking scarecrows, which is understandable, you Wurzel Gummidge looking swat. Let's see who gets that reference. But anyway, after inverting time, the player has a whopping 3 hours to explore and experiment before needing to reset due to this ticking clock. But why would the developers falsely represent the time the player has in these opening moments? Well, isn't that misleading? Well, yes, but it's also to the player's benefit. There isn't actually a lot to tackle on this first day, with races and blockades barring the player's path from the wider game while in Deku form, so progression is completely linear here, and because of this, most players are going to get to the clock tower entrance before its designated opening time, and this forces the player to wait around, honing their focus down towards the ticking clock itself and how fast it is progressing. In reality, on future runs, the player has more than enough time to pursue the task they want, but that sense of pressure that this opening cycle conditions still lingers, and this influences their decision making going forward. But even with this extended time frame, there is a lot to do here, and might I remind you that this all gets reset after this 3-hour period. So how is all of that managed? Well, first of all, the developers do a fantastic job of guiding players in the micro, leading them to threads to pull through question and answer design. We spoke about this concept in my Animal Well episode with Billy Basso. It's the art of providing the player with a question and then meaningful ways to explore the potential answers to that question throughout gameplay. And you want to be constantly providing the player with new questions. How do I get past this guard? What does this do? Why is everyone so racist to the Deku Scrubs? But frustration is born when no avenues to answers are given. There are no threads to pull. This is how players become lost and disinterested, but Majora doesn't have this problem whatsoever. Because throughout their journey, the player will encounter a whole slew of characters and obstacles that have clear mechanical challenges or require specific items for progression, and these are all questions. Now, answers to these could already be in the player's possession through clever use of their form abilities or masks, but if not, the answers are also commonly themed around the NPCs that pose the question. Huh? Oh, you want to get into the milk bar? Well, it's a good idea to go hunt down the Milky Bar kids and follow their questline, which will eventually give you the Moo Moo Cow mask. Well, I wonder what that's used for. And this kind of simplicity is a necessity when trying to recall hundreds of questions that may have cropped up days ago in the game, which can lead the players in the right direction without an over-reliance on guides, which games of this era will want to do. Because as overwhelming as this could all become due to the sheer number of questions, the game is always positioning the player in the correct orientation to naturally stumble upon answers themselves. For example, to get into the northern snow area, the player needs the bomb mask or bag. And talking to NPCs at different times gives them clues to the location of these items, but once that knowledge is obtained and the player manages to complete the associated challenge, they are already situated in this northern section of the town, pointing in the direction of progress organically if you didn't already have the information on where to go. Sometimes you get the answer, the bomb mask, before the question. Here, their roles are reversed. One of the most satisfying things about this game is that a question could be posed on your first ever cycle, and then weeks later, the answer could crop up out of nowhere, giving you new goals for the next cycle, which is unbelievably entertaining. But as a reminder, everything apart from key items and masks gets reset when the player inevitably has to reverse time. So how do you allow the player to stay on top of all of this when NPCs no longer remember your face, or the change you affected on the world is completely erased? Wouldn't this lead to a lot of repeated gameplay? Well, the answer is no, and that's all due to mechanical breakpoints. Because the game's main story quest and some of its beefier side content can take around 3 to 5 in-game days to complete for the uninitiated, there has to be a way for the players to pick up on partial progress, otherwise these quests would be mindlessly repetitive as players learned, or outright impossible to do due to the time constraints. So within these large quests, the player will encounter mechanical breakpoints, which are either knowledge checks or mechanical interactions that allow the player to skip to a specific portion of the questline during the next cycle. And this is commonly a unique song or mask required by a specific NPC or interactable object, allowing the player to completely skip what came before that point in the questline if the world resets. Meaning that unless the player is completely mentally malfunctioning and default walking into a wall for 3 hours straight, they will nearly always pass a mechanical breakpoint, allowing for quicker engagement on the next run. The game then provides multiple of these inside larger questlines to effectively create shortcuts that are tied to player knowledge. For example, in order to enter the Woodfall Temple, there are multiple knowledge checks early on that could potentially let players skip forward, such as understanding the item required to wake up the witch, or learning the location of the monkey captured by the Deku King. And then one large mechanical breakpoint would be from this monkey learning the Sonata of Awakening. This, along with unlockable fast travel, eventually allows players to be at the dungeon's entrance at the very beginning of day 1 if they really wanted to. And these mechanical breakpoints create checkpoints like we see in other games, but in a way that still keeps this pressure of time alive and allows for the complete reset of the game's world as well. And these can be seen sprinkled throughout the 4 main questlines. And all of this to do with mechanical breakpoints is just genius, and the only place that this game really falls down with its time management is when it forces the players to just kick rocks and wait for NPCs to finish their business. Now, it's true that the schedules and daily activities of the world's inhabitants and cross-referencing them inside the notebook are a huge contributing factor to what makes this world feel alive, but there are these rare instances where along the player's journey, instead of reaching a breakpoint, they reach a time-gated activity, and this could be as simple as the giant rock that needs to be excavated so you can access the farm on day 3, or waiting for a shop to open. Now, I'm not saying all waiting is bad, but they're not created equally. Forcing the player to wait can have an immense benefit, like the aforementioned waiting for the clock tower door to open so you can focus on the time on the first cycle, or for a more emotional example, after the incredibly complex side quest of trying to reunite the star-crossed lovers, Anju resolved to withstand the impending apocalypse to stay loyal to Carthay against her family's wishes, with Carthay sprinting back across the world just for a final chance to be reunited in their final moments. Having the player wait beside alongside Andrew for Carfe's return is beautiful and honestly extremely moving. And on the other side of the waiting spectrum, oh, you want to buy a glass of milk? Well, why don't you sit outside this store for 4 hours straight with your cow hat on, you pleb? It's about stopping to smell the flowers. Well, I guess this does give the opportunity for players to wander around and talk to NPCs to uncover new questions, but I'm not sure why they didn't just give the player more control on how far they can skip into the future, because by playing the song with double time, the player can jump to the next available dawn or dusk, but it's stuck at those increments. So the player could simply want to go shopping or investigate a task that's been signified by the notebook, but they might have to sit there for upwards of half a day just to get to that point. Why not just allow players to skip in hour increments or to a selected time they wanted to go to? If the argument that you're thinking of is that this would ruin the player's perspective of time, I would compare this to fast travel. Most players in Spider-Man, for example, would prefer to swing their way to their destinations because the act of engaging with this mechanic is half the point of the entire game. But fast travel is implemented there as an option for the players who might need or want it. If you don't want to use that system, then don't use it, but at least give the players who view AFKing in front of a door for 4 hours straight as tedium the option to actually have that finer control. But all of that being said, it's crazy how the thing that seemed to be the most complex thing with this project, the interlocking questlines and objectives between characters across 3 days, is the most effortless thing in the entire game, but the teaching when it comes to its basic puzzle interactions makes way less sense, because there is a lot of moon logic here. Well, of course there's moon logic. Well, you're not wrong, but I wasn't talking about the big cheese. Moon logic is when a puzzle solution requires strange leaps in logic that the game hasn't taught yet, or even worse, runs counter to what the game has previously conditioned. And there's barely any of it in Majora's actual quest design, which is kind of shocking. It's more present in its self-contained puzzles. For example, in the final dungeon, there is a room with 4 statues, and the initial room's framing on entry draws attention to their importance. They don't seem to do anything, but if attacked, the ones in the lava will wake up and can be killed. So the obvious response would be to turn around and to try and tackle the ones in the center of the room, but they can't be attacked. But there is a signifier that they can be grabbed, but they can't be moved. The actual solution is killing the other one half submerged in lava, and also getting rid of this block in the center and killing 2 more statues behind it. And now I'm all for asset reuse, but why have these 2 statues here just for obfuscation's sake? To my knowledge, they're not used anywhere else in the dungeon, so adding the grabbable tag as well for them just makes it 2 layers deep in confusion and draws away from the actual solution, which is breaking the skylight to let the light down. Another example of this is these grabby hands. The player has been conditioned in the water temple that these are a hazard to be avoided or killed with the drive-by zap. Being grabbed by them is never a good thing, but here in the final dungeon, the objective is to be grabbed by it so it can place you above on a ledge? What, maybe it's meant to grab you when you're moving back through the area in confusion? Well, the default Zora swim speed is faster than the grab animation, so the player would have to actively do this, which just runs counter to previous conditioning. Part of this self-contained puzzle problem is because there are failsafes within questlines to push the player towards mechanical breakpoints with the NPC dialogue, or in extreme cases, the Sheikah Stones just outright telling you what to do, but there isn't anything of this sort for direct puzzle solutions, apart from Tattle's cryptic hints which just barely tell you anything. Some of these things that the puzzles require you to do, I'm not sure how you would possibly understand how to do it without looking it up or randomly stumbling into the solution, but honestly, they're few and far between, and the overall journey was mostly smooth sailing and led to one of the most memorable endings I have ever experienced. After exploring the world tirelessly for what seemed like months in-game, I slowly built up mastery over the game's mechanics and collected every single mask. Not just because I'm a completionist asshat who cannot stand to look at an unoccupied slot without having a fucking vein pop, but because the quests were genuinely rewarding, narratively and extrinsically, with their collectible masks. For collecting them and eventually relinquishing them, I was rewarded with a set of alternate ending sequences with unique challenges, but left with fewer tools for the encroaching ending boss fight, until I was gifted with the Fierce Deity mask by the boss itself. And this 100% completely eviscerates the challenge of the game, but I've honestly never felt anything like it. The act of getting to this final point, with all this pent-up anxiety of all the challenges that I'd have to repeat to get back to this point if I failed, to be be gifted with a way to completely destroy the source of that anxiety as a reward for my hard work collecting everything in the game is the single greatest sense of video game catharsis I have ever felt. For example, the final fight against Metal Gear Rex in MGS left such a sour taste in my mouth, with it repeatedly killing me and making me watch Grey Fox's sacrifice over and over again. Its mechanical design really took away from the story it was trying to tell, in my opinion. Majora was easy because of the fierce deity mask, but left me with that feeling of catharsis, and I don't think that would have been as sweet if Majora just kicked my teeth in 20 times just for the sake of a linear difficulty curve. All in all, the shift from Ocarina to Majora was a really ballsy move from Nintendo, a reminder that these games are largely marketed towards children who might be intimidated by the game's darker tone and mechanical complexity, leading to a lot of them to put it down, but in doing so would then come back as they grew up and play with a new appreciation and understanding for what it was trying to do. Honestly, this might be my new favourite Zelda game of all time, but that being said, I've never played Wind Waker, so maybe that'll get voted in soon. And speaking of votes, the next chance to vote on the upcoming Retro Jay's Never Played It Before Design Delve and accompanying stream will be tomorrow, June 23rd at 7 PM EST over on my personal Twitch channel, which will be between Final Fantasy IX, Metal Gear Solid 2 and Myst. So we got a stacked lineup of choices for you. So I hope to see you there, guys, and if not, I'll see you in the next one. Bye!